Our story begins in Montana, a land of wide open spaces and towering mountains. Here, nestled amongst the rolling hills, was Dusty's ranch. Dusty was a kind man, his face etched with the lines of hard work and sun. He wasn't old, maybe in his late 30s, but life on the ranch had aged him some. He had a warm smile that didn't get used enough. Dusty's days were filled with the rhythms of ranch life. He tended to his cattle, mended fences, and made sure everything was running smoothly. He wasn't unhappy, but a quiet loneliness often settled over him in the evenings. His only companions were his loyal dog, Blue, and the cattle that roamed his land. Blue was a good dog, but couldn't quite fill the hole in Dusty's heart. He often found himself sitting on his porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. He'd think about the future, and wonder if it would always be just him, Blue, and the endless Montana sky. He longed for someone to share the beauty of the sunsets with, someone to laugh with around a crackling fire. Someone to share his life with. Little did he know, his life was about to change in a way he never imagined. A change that would come on 4 paws. The change Dusty longed for was brewing on the horizon, quite literally. A storm, dark and angry, rolled in off the mountains. The wind howled like a hungry wolf, and the rain lashed against the windows of Dusty's cabin. Blue, usually fearless, whined and huddled closer to the fireplace. Dusty watched the storm with a mixture of awe and concern. He knew these Montana storms could be fierce, and he worried about his cattle out in the pasture. He made sure the barn doors were securely fastened and that the animals had plenty of hay. As the storm reached its peak, a sound cut through the wind and rain. It was a faint, desperate whimpering. At first, Dusty thought it was just the wind playing tricks on his ears. But then he heard it again, clearer this time, coming from somewhere near the fence line. Dusty hesitated. The storm was raging, and it was dangerous to be outside. But the sound of the whimpering tugged at his heart. He couldn't ignore it. He grabbed his thickest coat, a flashlight, and his trusty hat, and stepped out into the fury of the storm. Blue barked anxiously at the door, wanting to follow, but Dusty told him to stay. He knew this was something he had to do alone. The rancher ventured out into the darkness, determined to find the source of that desperate cry. The wind tried to rip the flashlight from Dusty's grasp as he trudged through the mud. The rain plastered his hair to his forehead, and he squinted against the blinding downpour. He followed the sound of the whimpering, his heart pounding with each step. It was coming from the far corner of the pasture, near where the barbed wire fence ran alongside the woods. Finally, he saw her. Huddled beneath a scraggly bush, seeking some small shelter from the storm, was a small dog. She was soaking wet, shivering uncontrollably, and her fur was matted with mud. Dusty knelt down, shielding his flashlight to get a better look. He gasped. The dog was terribly thin, and he could see ribs poking through her matted fur. There were visible cuts and bruises on her body, and one of her legs was twisted at an unnatural angle. Her eyes, wide and filled with fear, looked up at him pleadingly. It was clear she had been through something terrible. Dusty's heart ached for the poor creature. He reached out a hand slowly, cautiously, afraid of startling her. "Easy, girl," he said softly, his voice barely audible above the storm. "I'm not going to hurt you." The dog flinched, but didn't move. Dusty knew he had to get her out of the storm, and fast. Carefully, Dusty reached out again, this time offering the back of his hand for her to sniff. She hesitated for a moment, then tentatively reached out her nose and sniffed his hand. He could feel her tiny body trembling. Slowly, he slid his hand beneath her, gently lifting her into his arms. She was so light, it was as if he were holding a handful of feathers. He cradled her close to his chest, trying to shield her from the wind and rain. She didn't struggle, but he could feel her muscles tense. He spoke softly to her as he carried her back to the cabin, telling her everything would be all right. He knew she couldn't understand his words, but he hoped the tone of his voice would offer some comfort. Back inside the warm cabin, Dusty carefully placed the dog on a thick blanket near the fireplace. Blue, curious but cautious, sniffed at the newcomer. Dusty kept a reassuring hand on Blue's back, letting him know everything was okay. He fetched a soft towel and gently began to dry the dog's fur. He noticed more details of her injuries as he worked, a deep gash on her side, a missing patch of fur near her ear. He knew he had to get her to the vet as soon as the storm passed. He decided to call her Hope. He hoped he could give her a new life, a better life, filled with love and kindness. He knew it would take time, but he was willing to give her all the time she needed. Hope was still very scared. Every time Dusty moved, she flinched. If he raised his hand to pet her, she cowered, tucking her tail between her legs. Dusty understood. He knew she had been hurt, maybe badly, by someone before. He would have to be patient. He cleaned her wounds as gently as he could, using warm water and a soft cloth. She whimpered softly with each touch, but she didn't try to bite or run away. He could see the trust, however small, beginning to flicker in her eyes. He wrapped her injured leg in a soft bandage, hoping to provide some support. He offered her a bowl of water and some soft food, a mixture of canned dog food and warm broth. She lapped at the water eagerly, but only nibbled at the food. Dusty didn't push her. He knew she needed time to heal, both physically and emotionally. He made a comfortable bed for her near the fireplace, using soft blankets and old pillows. He sat beside her, stroking her fur gently, speaking to her in a low, soothing voice. He told her about the ranch, about the cattle, about Blue. He told her she was safe now, that he would never let anyone hurt her again. He stayed with her for hours, until finally, her eyes fluttered closed, and she drifted off to sleep. Dusty smiled. It was a small victory, but a victory nonetheless. He knew the road to recovery would be long, but he was ready to walk it with her, every step of the way. Sleep offered Hope a brief respite from her fear, but even in her dreams, she wasn't safe. Flashback. A shadow loomed over her, large and menacing. A door slammed shut with a deafening bang, making her jump. A gruff voice yelled, and a hand, large and calloused, reached out towards her. She yelped and cowered, trying to escape, but there was nowhere to go. The hand grabbed her roughly, and she cried out in pain. End flashback. Hope woke with a start, her body trembling. She looked around wildly, her eyes darting from corner to corner. She was in a strange place, but it was warm and safe. She saw Dusty sleeping in a chair nearby, his face peaceful. Blue was curled up at his feet, snoring softly. She slowly got to her feet, her injured leg still stiff and sore. She took a tentative step towards Dusty, then another. She wasn't sure why, but she felt drawn to him. He was different from the shadows in her memory. He was gentle and kind. She reached him and nudged his hand with her nose. Dusty stirred and opened his eyes. He smiled when he saw her. "Hey there, girl," he said softly, his voice still thick with sleep. "You okay?" Hope wagged her tail tentatively, a tiny flicker of happiness in her eyes. Dusty reached out and gently stroked her fur. This time, she didn't flinch. The next few days were slow and steady. The storm had passed, leaving behind a world washed clean and bright. Dusty took Hope to the vet, who confirmed her leg was badly sprained but not broken. He gave Dusty some pain medication and instructions on how to care for her. Dusty continued to be patient and gentle with Hope. He never forced her to do anything she didn't want to do. He let her set the pace. He spent hours just sitting with her, talking to her in a soothing voice, letting her know she was safe and loved. He hand-fed her small meals, coaxing her to eat. Slowly, ever so slowly, Hope began to trust him. She started wagging her tail more often, not just a tentative flick, but a full, enthusiastic wag. She started eating more, gaining back some of the weight she had lost. She even started playing, chasing after a ball Dusty tossed for her, her injured leg still a little wobbly, but her spirit soaring. She still flinched at sudden movements, and loud noises still made her jump, but the fear in her eyes was slowly being replaced by something else, hope. Dusty could see it, shining brighter every day. He knew they still had a long way to go, but he was filled with a sense of optimism he hadn't felt in years. Hope was healing, and so was he. As Hope grew stronger, Dusty started taking her with him as he went about his daily chores. At first, she was hesitant, sticking close to his side, her eyes wide with apprehension. But as she saw him interacting with the cattle, mending fences, and simply enjoying the wide open spaces, she began to relax. She would follow him everywhere, her little tail wagging furiously. She became his shadow, always there, always happy to be by his side. Blue, initially unsure of the newcomer, soon warmed up to Hope, and the two dogs became fast friends. They would chase each other through the fields, play tug-of-war with old ropes, and nap together in the sun. Dusty found himself talking to Hope, sharing his thoughts and feelings with her. He told her about his dreams for the ranch, about his family, about the loneliness he had felt before she came into his life. He knew she couldn't understand his words, but he felt like she understood his heart. Hope, in turn, seemed to sense Dusty's every mood. When he was happy, she would bounce around him, full of energy. When he was sad, she would snuggle close, offering silent comfort. She was more than just a dog, she was a companion, a friend, a source of unconditional love. Dusty's life was no longer lonely. It was filled with laughter, with joy, and with the unwavering loyalty of a little dog named Hope. A few weeks later, Dusty took Hope back to the vet for a checkup. The vet, a kind woman named Dr. Emily Carter, was impressed with Hope's progress. "She's made a remarkable recovery," she said, stroking Hope's soft fur. "You've done a wonderful job with her, Dusty." Dusty smiled, feeling a surge of pride. "She's a strong little dog," he said. "She's been through a lot, but she's got a good spirit." Dr. Carter examined Hope's leg, which was now almost fully healed. "She'll always have a bit of a limp," she said, "and she might be a little skittish around strangers, but she's going to be just fine. She's lucky to have found you, Dusty." Dusty looked at Hope, who was wagging her tail and licking his hand. "I'm the lucky one," he said softly. "She's changed my life." As he was leaving, Dr. Carter gave Dusty a knowing smile. "You know," she said, "sometimes the ones who need rescuing the most are the ones who end up doing the rescuing." Dusty thought about her words as he drove home, Hope nestled beside him in the truck. He realized Dr. Carter was right. He had rescued Hope, but in many ways, she had rescued him, too. She had filled his life with purpose, with love, and with a connection he never thought possible. The days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months. Hope continued to thrive under Dusty's care. She loved playing fetch in the fields with Blue, her little limp barely slowing her down. She loved snuggling up with Dusty on the couch in the evenings, watching the sunset through the window. She loved going for rides in the truck, her head hanging out the window, her ears flapping in the wind. Dusty cherished these moments. He loved watching Hope run and play, her tail wagging with unbridled joy. He loved feeling her warm body snuggled against him, offering silent comfort. He loved seeing the trust and love in her eyes, knowing that he had played a part in her healing. He taught her tricks: sit, stay, come, shake. She learned quickly, eager to please him. He bought her toys, and she would spend hours chewing on them, her little body wriggling with happiness. At night, Hope would sleep at the foot of Dusty's bed, her presence a constant reassurance. He knew she was always there, watching over him, protecting him in her own way. He often found himself waking up in the middle of the night, just to look at her, to make sure she was okay. He would stroke her fur gently, whispering words of love and gratitude. He vowed to protect her, to keep her safe, to give her the best life he possibly could. She deserved nothing less. He owed her everything. Their peaceful life continued for several months. Dusty and Hope were inseparable. Their days were filled with simple joys. Dusty would throw a bright red ball for Hope, and she would chase after it with boundless enthusiasm, her little limp adding to her charm. She would bring it back to him, dropping it at his feet, her tail wagging expectantly, ready for another round. In the evenings, after a long day of work, Dusty would relax on the porch, watching the sunset. Hope would curl up at his feet, her head resting on his lap, content to simply be near him. Sometimes, Blue would join them, and the three of them would sit in comfortable silence, enjoying the beauty of the Montana sky. Even herding cattle became a game. While Blue did the serious work, Hope would playfully nip at the heels of the cows, sending them scattering in different directions. Dusty would chuckle, shaking his head at her antics. He knew she wasn't really helping, but he appreciated her enthusiasm. Their life together was a tapestry of small, precious moments, woven together with love, loyalty, and companionship. It was a life Dusty never thought possible, a life he wouldn't trade for anything in the world. But their peaceful existence was about to be disrupted. A shadow from Hope's past was about to return, threatening to shatter the happiness they had found. One afternoon, a beat-up truck rumbled up the long driveway to Dusty's ranch. A man, tall and burly with a scowl etched on his face, stepped out. He didn't smile, didn't wave, just stood there, his eyes scanning the property. Dusty, who was mending a fence near the barn, approached him cautiously. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice polite but firm. The man grunted. "I'm looking for my dog," he said, his voice rough and gravelly. "Heard someone found her around here a few months back." Dusty's heart sank. He knew exactly who the man was talking about. He glanced over at Hope, who was lying in the shade of the porch, watching them with wary eyes. She seemed to sense the tension in the air. "What's the dog's name?" Dusty asked, stalling for time. "Doesn't matter," the man said dismissively. "She's a small, scruffy thing. Got a limp. Answers to just about anything." Dusty's blood began to boil. He couldn't believe this man was Hope's previous owner. He didn't seem to care about her at all. "Well, I haven't seen any dog like that," Dusty lied, his voice hardening. "You must have the wrong place." He would protect Hope, no matter what. This man would not get his hands on her again. The man narrowed his eyes, suspicion etched on his face. "Don't give me that," he growled, taking a step closer to Dusty. "I know she's here. I saw her." He pointed towards the porch, where Hope was now trembling, her tail tucked firmly between her legs. Dusty stood his ground, his body tense, ready to defend Hope at all costs. "I told you, you're mistaken," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "Now, I suggest you leave my property before I call the sheriff." The man scoffed. "You can't just keep someone else's dog," he said, his voice rising. "She's mine, and I want her back." Dusty's mind raced. He thought back to the night he found Hope, shivering and terrified, her body covered in bruises. He remembered the fear in her eyes, the way she flinched at every touch. He knew, deep in his heart, that this man was not telling the truth. He would never let Hope go back to that life of misery. "That dog was abandoned and injured," Dusty said, his voice shaking with anger. "I found her, I nursed her back to health, and she's staying with me. She's safe here." He puffed out his chest and stood tall. "Now get off my land." The man's face contorted with rage. He took another step forward, his fists clenched. "You think you can just keep what's mine?" he spat, his eyes filled with venom. "I'm warning you, mister, you don't want to mess with me." Dusty stood firm, his gaze unwavering. He might have been a simple rancher, but he wasn't afraid of this bully. He knew he was doing the right thing, protecting a defenseless creature from harm. He stood tall, ready to face whatever came his way. "I'm not afraid of you," Dusty said, his voice steady despite the pounding of his heart. "You need to leave. Now." The man hesitated, his eyes darting between Dusty and the porch, where Hope was watching them with wide, fearful eyes. He seemed to weigh his options, calculating whether it was worth the fight. Finally, with a snarl of frustration, he turned and stomped back to his truck. He slammed the door shut and revved the engine, sending a cloud of dust billowing into the air as he sped away. Dusty watched him go, his body still tense with adrenaline. He knew the man might come back, but he wouldn't let him take Hope. He would fight for her, protect her, no matter the cost. He turned to Hope, who was still trembling on the porch. He walked towards her, his heart filled with love and protectiveness. As Dusty reached the porch, Hope stood up, her tail wagging tentatively. He knelt down and gently stroked her fur, murmuring words of comfort. "It's okay, girl," he said softly. "He's gone now. You're safe." Hope seemed to understand. She leaned into his touch, her body relaxing slightly. Then, she did something she had never done before. She reached out and licked his hand, a small, hesitant gesture of gratitude and affection. Dusty's heart melted. He knew, in that moment, that their bond was stronger than ever. He had stood up for her, protected her from harm, and she had recognized his love and loyalty. He wrapped his arms around her, holding her close. "I'll always protect you, Hope," he whispered. "I promise." The incident with the stranger brought them even closer. Hope became even more attached to Dusty, following him everywhere, never wanting to leave his side. She seemed to sense that he was her protector, her safe haven in a world that had once been filled with fear and pain. Dusty, in turn, became even more devoted to Hope, showering her with love and attention. He knew that she would always be a little skittish, a little wary of strangers, but he would be there for her, every step of the way, offering her reassurance and support. He knew their love was something special, something unbreakable. Years passed. The stranger never returned. Hope continued to thrive, her limp barely noticeable as she ran and played with Blue. Her fur grew thick and glossy, her eyes sparkled with happiness, and her tail wagged almost constantly. She was no longer the scared, injured dog Dusty had found shivering in the storm. She was a happy, healthy, and much-loved member of the family. She remained a little skittish around strangers, but with Dusty by her side, she felt safe and secure. She knew that he would always protect her, no matter what. Her devotion to him was unwavering. She followed him everywhere, her eyes always on him, her tail wagging whenever he spoke to her. She still loved playing fetch, snuggling on the couch, and going for rides in the truck. She even became a bit of a cattle dog, helping Blue herd the cows, though her methods were still a little unconventional. Dusty often looked at Hope and marveled at the transformation. He had saved her life, but she had given him so much more in return. She had filled his life with love, laughter, and purpose. He couldn't imagine his life without her. She truly was his everything. He was no longer lonely. He had hope, and that was all that mattered. Blue, of course, was pretty great too. Dusty often reflected on how much his life had changed since that stormy night. He used to come home to an empty house, filled with silence and loneliness. Now, he was greeted by the enthusiastic barking of two happy dogs, their tails wagging furiously. He used to spend his evenings alone, watching the sunset in silence. Now, he had Hope curled up at his feet, her warm presence a constant comfort. He had always been a kind man, but Hope had brought out a new level of compassion and empathy in him. He had learned the importance of patience, of forgiveness, and of unconditional love. He had discovered the joy of rescuing a creature in need and witnessing its transformation. He was no longer just a rancher, tending to his cattle and mending fences. He was a protector, a provider, and a friend. He had found a purpose in life that he never knew existed. He still missed having someone to share his life with, someone to laugh with, someone to hold close. But Hope had filled a void in his heart that he never thought could be filled. She was his family, his companion, his everything. And he was hers. They were a team, a pair, two souls who had found each other in the most unlikely of circumstances. He was truly grateful for the little dog who had changed his life forever. The sun was setting over the Montana landscape, painting the sky in hues of orange, purple, and gold. Dusty and Hope sat side by side on the porch, watching the spectacle unfold. Blue was nearby, dozing peacefully in the warm evening air. Dusty gently stroked Hope's fur, feeling the soft, familiar texture beneath his fingers. He thought back to that stormy night, when he had found her shivering and afraid. He marveled at how far they had both come. Hope leaned into his touch, her tail wagging contentedly. Her eyes, once filled with fear, now sparkled with love and trust. She was home. She was safe. She was loved. Dusty looked at Hope, his heart overflowing with gratitude. He was no longer the lonely rancher he had once been. He had found companionship, purpose, and unconditional love in the most unexpected of places. He leaned down and whispered in her ear, his voice filled with emotion. "You're my everything, Hope," he said. "Thank you for saving me." Hope licked his face in response, her eyes shining with affection. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the landscape. Dusty and Hope sat in comfortable silence, their hearts connected by an unbreakable bond. They were two souls who had found each other in the darkness and had created a life filled with light and love. And as the stars began to twinkle in the night sky, they knew that their story would continue, forever intertwined. The end.